After many videos and weeks of preparation, we are finally ready to talk about actually generating a render. Today we're going to be talking about actually generating a render from your scene. We're going to be talking about what samples are and how they interact with resolution. We're going to be talking about the different types of files you can generate, and we're going to be talking about all the different types of passes. And we're just going to be very, very briefly touching on generating animations. What better place to start than with what the fuck are samples? No matter what you generate, you're always going to be creating basically just an image made up of pixels within which there's visual information stored. Samples represents the amount of times that the computer is doing the calculations to figure out exactly what visual data is in each of those pixels. Higher samples raises your render time, but also ups the quality because the computer is doing more math to figure out exactly what is happening inside of each individual pixel. There is a point in which continuing to render your sample count is not going to raise the quality of the image that much, but it will always up your render time. So, I'm not getting any younger. Keep it reasonable. There's a trick to all this though. If you up the resolution of an image being produced, that means it is essentially the same image made up of more pixels. What that means is that each pixel represents a smaller portion of the whole image that you're creating. For this reason, one of the ways that you can create a clearer image is by upping the resolution while keeping the sample number the same. This is still going to take a while, but it is a little bit easier than just trying to push the sample number higher and higher and higher. It's important to note that renderings with caustics or very complex lighting environments are going to benefit from higher sample rates more than normal materials would. So if you are struggling with some of those, sometimes the answer is just to push your samples higher. Knowing this, in your renderings options, I would always suggest going with maximum samples over maximum time because it gives you that higher level of control in the relationship between your samples and your resolution. The type of image file that you export as a render, it kind of depends on what you want to do with it. You're probably already familiar with PNGs and JPEGs, but as a refresher, we'll just go over them briefly. PNGs are typically used for the fact that they don't lose quality as they're compressed, and they support transparencies. However, JPEGs are usually preferred on the web or any situation where you're going to be sharing a large dimension file because they can compress further than PNGs. Therefore, you get a bigger image with a lower byte count. Yeah. EXR files are multi-channel files mostly used in the entertainment industry, except for very extreme situations. You're probably not going to be interacting with them a whole lot. And TIFF files are big. I'm talking huge, like enormous, just absolutely gigantic. These files don't compress at all. They're meant to be a very, very high quality editable files meant for storage. So if you're intending on doing a ton of editing on an image that you're generating in Photoshop or whatever, they're good for that because you won't lose any quality pre-export from that other program. Also in your render outputs, you have your layers and passes. Layer renderings will render layers individually against a white background. You can create layers in the Scene tab of the Projects window. These are typically either compiled later in Photoshop or just kept separate for explanatory purposes. For render passes, each pass will generate an individual image for the correlating property of the render that they're named after. These names are fairly self-explanatory, but I would always suggest rendering with your clown pass on, as it's a really easy way if you need to go into Photoshop and fix something later. It will immediately give you something to draw masks from, which is just, a huge time saver. Region rendering can be prompted here, or it can be prompted on the top bar here in your live view. This is a really helpful tool for quickly checking the appropriate number of samples that you might need for an area that might give you some difficulty. When rendering an animation, a lot of the same properties are present, since what is an animation but many still rendered. Notable differences are the option to select what time frame you want to use, as well as different file output settings. You also have the ability to toggle your frame outputs on and off. If you render with your frame outputs, it'll save separately in a folder that it will create each individual frame of the animation that you're making. So you've got your sampling figured out and all the other stuff sorted. Now you can hit render or add to queue. Your queue allows you to set up renders, then add them as jobs on a list. Remember when we were talking about studios? You can also add directly from the studio setups. Once you've got your queue lined up and you've got a big bunch of renders to do, you can hit process queue to start rendering all of the things that you put in there. So you're rendering. You might think that's it, but it's not. There's more. I hope this video was helpful. Render settings are kind of important to the whole render thing, and knowing what samples are, how they relate to resolution, and all these other things can be really helpful with your troubleshooting. Rough spots within your render, or just generally having problems with things not coming out how you want them to. In addition to that, render queues and stuff like that are super, super useful tools. They'll streamline your workflow a lot, especially if you're using a school computer. It allows you to set up a whole bunch of renders, hit go, and walk away for however many hours that might take. I know through this series I've kind of hinted at maybe going more into detail on animation stuff, and I'd really like to. And if that's something that you all feel like you might be interested in seeing, yeah, message me and let me know. But as always, if you need more help, message me or Kyle, and good luck.